Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Hansen. Today we'll be looking at the Mediterranean diet and how it affects the gut microbiome. So, what is this Mediterranean diet? Well, we could see here on the picture on the left that it's a diet that's found, or diet pattern rather, that's found right in the Mediterranean region, which includes parts of Europe as well as North Africa. The diet's pretty diverse in the foods they eat since it incorporates a lot of countries. However, the dietary pattern is pretty much the same. Emphasis on whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, dairy, and then a few times a week, eggs, fish, lean poultry, sweets, red meat just a few times a month, and wine in moderation, followed by also daily exercise. Now, this is more of a plant based diet versus an animal based diet, and the studies have shown that the Mediterranean diet does have positive effects on the cardiovascular system, and it's a heart healthy diet. And this diet also is very high in vitamins, minerals, fibers, omega 3 fatty acids, as well as polyphenols, which are shown to have an anti inflammatory effect on the body. So now we're going to explore how this diet basically interacts with our gut microbiome. So you may ask, what is the gut microbiome? The gut microbiome is found in the large intestine within our colon. There are about 2 million microbial genes versus 20,000 to 30,000 human genes, making us more bacteria or microbiome than human. Some of it include roles in maintaining gastric systems and the immune system. The gut microbiome varies among individuals. Usually the health of the intestine or rather the gut microbiome is measured in diversity and abundance. The more diverse, the more abundant the different kinds of beneficial bacteria, the healthier the gut is. Some of the common species include firmicutes, bacteroidetes, actinobacteria, which is also known as bifidobacterium, proteobacteria, varroacomicrobia, and various other bacteria. Some of the determinants of the gut microbiome include environment, genetics, inflammation, antibiotics, host phenotype, and diet, which is the main factor we are looking into today. The gut microbiome has various roles in the body. First role is it protects against pathogenic bacteria, plus it maintains a large intestine mucosal barrier, preventing any bacteria from entering into the small intestine. This mucopolysaccharide is known as mucin. Therefore, if you have a good diet of fiber, the bacteria eat the fiber rather than eating the mucosal barrier. The, the gut microbiome also develops and manages the immune system both locally within the gut and also systemically within the human body. The gut microbiome also have enzymes that digest complex carbohydrates such as oligosaccharides and resistant starch, and this yields energy for both the bacteria and colonic cells. The bacteria also produce beneficial compounds, such as synthesis of vitamin K, synthesis of short fat chain fatty acids such as butyrate, acetate, and propionate, and they also produce satiety hormones such as glucagon like peptide 1 and peptide YY to control appetite. So, therefore, it has a very important role in our body, producing a sort of symbiotic relationship. So, diet affects the microbiome in many ways. So, we have our dietary intake of protein, fat, carbohydrates, polyphenols, prebiotics, and probiotics that can affect the which bacteria grow in our colon, therefore altering gut bacteria, which causes changes in bifidobacteria, lactobacilli, and Akkermansia. There's also biological effects of how diet affects our microbiome, including altering host metabolism, immune system, production of pro and anti inflammatory metabolites. It also has the effect, or the diet has the effect on the microbiome, which can also affect our rate of disease, such as looking at rates of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, and autoimmune disease. So these all factors affect so diet affects our gut, which can then affect our body. The Mediterranean diet emphasizes consuming mostly plant-based foods. That includes plant-based proteins, such as those found in legumes. We see here that plant proteins have a positive effect on the gut microbiome, such that it increases beneficial bacteria, such as bifidobacterium, and decreases pathogenic bacteria, such as bacteroides. This positive effect increases short chain fatty acids, which can in turn increase the strength of the gut barrier, increase T regulatory cells, which produce anti inflammatory factors, and thus decrease inflammation. We also see, however, that if animal proteins are consumed, that increases more pathogenic bacteria, such as Ruminococcus, and decreases beneficial bacteria. This increase in pathogenic bacteria can produce more harmful compounds, such as trimethylamine nitrogen oxide, which is also a biomarker for cardiovascular disease and can also lead to cardiovascular disease. We also see that there's a decrease in short chain fatty acids, which can have an effect on the gut, such that it can increase risk for inflammatory bowel diseases. The Mediterranean diet emphasizes unsaturated fat sources such as olive oil. These fat sources increase beneficial bacteria such as bifidobacterium, which can inhibit inflammation from the gut as well as from the white adipose tissue, along with inhibiting total cholesterol synthesis and LDL synthesis. However, if you consume more saturated fats, that increases pathogenic bacteria such as bacteroides, which can have a positive effect on toll-like receptor activation, which is inflammation in the gut, as well as white adipose tissue inflammation. It can also inhibit insulin sensitivity, making people more insulin resistant. Thus, the type of fat we eat can definitely affect our gut microbiome. This slide gives us a wonderful summary of how a Western diet looks versus a Mediterranean. We see that a Western diet increases the production of pathogenic bacteria such as enterobacteria, and that can have an effect on inflammation, thus increasing inflammation, which can also increase our risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. However, we see that the Mediterranean diet, which contains many beneficial compounds such as polyphenols, complex carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, and the such, can actually inhibit inflammation, and which in turn can inhibit us developing a lot of these chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity. So we see how the Mediterranean diet does have a positive effect. However, we will definitely see how this effect happens in the later slides. Therefore, in the study, the question we would like to explore: how does adherence to a Mediterranean diet pattern affect the gut microbiome diversity, abundance, and metabolic composition? All the studies used were found on PubMed. Some of the keywords that were used include Mediterranean diet, gut microbiome, gut microbiota, Mediterranean diet and gut microbiota, Mediterranean diet and gut microbiota, and adherence Mediterranean diet and gut microbiome. This held 342 hits, but only 5 articles met the criteria. Some of the inclusion criteria included randomized controlled trials, case control studies, cross sectional studies, cohort studies, and anything that really reflected the effect of Mediterranean diet on the gut microbiome. Some of the studies that were excluded included systematic reviews, meta-analyses, animal studies, in vitro and vivo studies, and any studies which used Mediterranean diet as a form of treatment, such as any population with any other chronic conditions such as diabetes, arterial fibrillation, and rheumatoid arthritis. The characteristics of the studies include 4 cross-sectional studies, 1 randomized controlled trial. The number of participants included 20 to 360 healthy participants within the countries of Italy, Greece, and Spain. Some of the methods that were used to assess dietary adherence included food frequency questionnaires or weighted food diary, or within the randomized controlled trial, which gave food to the to the participants, which occurred at the research center. There was the adherence was measured using a modified questionnaire, which is an 11 to 14 item Mediterranean score, each of them different in their own ways. Some of the biomarkers that were used included stool and urine samples, which were evaluated and sequenced for the presence of bacterial metabolites such as short chain fatty acids, and the method to collect the data included 16 RNA gene amplification using PCR, and gas chromatography was used to extract any metabolites or gases that the bacteria produced. Overall, the results showed that consumption of a Mediterranean diet pattern rich in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and and low consumption of animal proteins led to a greater production of short chain fatty acids and lower firmicutes to bacteroidetes ratio, more bacteroidetes, less firmicutes. Also, we saw that a higher Mediterranean diet score were linked to greater numbers of beneficial bacteria such as bifidobacterium and short chain fatty acid bacteria, along with fiber degrading bacteria found in the Firmicutes phyla, such as Provotella, and lower levels of pathogenic bacteria, such as Escherichia coli, thus, a higher bifidobacteria to Escherichia coli ratio. We also saw that, unfortunately, with consumption of more Western dietary patterns, we see higher trimethylamine metabolites were produced, and these are people that adhere to a Western-based diet with more animal products, and thus garnered a lower Mediterranean diet score. So overall, this diagram does give a nice summary of what the Mediterranean diet does. So we see here that the Mediterranean diet has a high fiber content, antioxidant, and lower intake of red meat, thus showing an increase in total bacteria, and thus increasing the abundance of beneficial bacteria such as bifidobacterium, lactobacilli, provotella, eubacteria, roseburia, bacteroids, as compared to the Western diet, which has high animal and fat protein, which decrease the total bacteria abundance and also the diversity. And you could also see the decrease in beneficial bacteria with an increase in pathogenic bacteria. In conclusion, adherence to a Mediterranean diet pattern high in fruits, vegetables, whole grain reflects a more diverse and abundant microbiota based on the observational studies and one randomized controlled trial. This established a link between the Mediterranean diet and better health outcomes based on increased production of bacteria that break down complex carbohydrates and increase the abundance of short chain fatty acids, which have a positive effect on the body. However, we do need to have more standardized tools to be developed in order to measure adherence to diet and to measure the microbiome, thus encompassing a more individualized sort of diet. Because, as you know, the gut microbiota is different in every individual. And therefore, we need to make these methods more individualized, more standardized, so that it could be incorporated into nutrition practice. Thus, we need more randomized trials on more diverse populations to really establish a causation between, with a greater amount of people, between a Mediterranean diet and the gut microbiome, because it seems like all of the studies are, or results of the studies are all over the place. And we also need to know that any changes to the gut microbiome or any changes in diet can change the gut microbiome, but only for 2 days. Therefore, a person would need to sustain the Mediterranean diet over a longer period of time in order for the increase in beneficial bacteria to last. Thus, we need to we need to have more people go on the Mediterranean diet to impact their gut microbiota, but at the same time we need to really establish this causation. Thank you. Any questions?